Welcome to the second presentation, which talks about the management project characteristics. There are three fundamental aspects to the project requirements. First of all, it's about providing value back in the workplace. Secondly, it's a here and now problem, not a so-called there and then problem. What we mean by that is that it's something that is of concern to you and your organisation, rather than something that is a distant issue. Finally, it's about making a contribution to practice rather than making a contribution to theory. The focus is on generating usable knowledge. The project can be further characterised by what we've called the leadership of improvement, which is usually called the management of change. It's about making a difference. Secondly is the difference between puzzles and problems. Puzzles are usually things that are created by other people for other people to solve, whereas with problems, a number of intelligent people might suggest a number of alternative solutions which might yield the same outcome. Thus, there is a difference between detail complexity and dynamic complexity. A detail complexity might be something of a puzzle. That is something that can be broken down until you arrive at the correct answer. In real-world problems of dynamic complexity, this type of algorithm will not work. So, as a classic example of a dynamically complex issue is crime. If crime is repressed in a particular area of a city, all that happens is it is displaced. It isn't solved. Thus, putting extra resources onto the street merely displaces the problem, it doesn't solve it. Finally, there is the importance of impact or benefit. It's about making knowledge work, which is the motto of the university. There are a number of indicative requirements, and this list was provided by a colleague of mine called Yuri Boschik in his book Business Driven Action Learning, and it can be applied to the management project. First of all, it involves a strategic issue, but we need to think about what we mean by a strategic issue, which we'll develop a little bit later on. It involves cross-functional issues. It's multidisciplinary, but again, we will look at that a little bit later on. Importantly, it's externally focused. It's not just a purely internal issue. Therefore, it is market focused. It requires interaction with customers and or suppliers. It is a live issue, so this is a restatement that it is a here and now problem and not a there and then problem. It's a real life issue and something that ultimately will require a decision. This diagram shows the difference between an MBA management project, an MSc dissertation and a management report, the kind of thing that you'll be used to producing at work. The management project is a hybrid between a dissertation and a management report and is differentiated between rigour and relevance. Obviously, we don't want something that it does not have rigour and does not have relevance. Alternatively, management report may have the relevance but won't have the rigour of an academic report. Alternatively, MSc dissertation will have plenty of rigour but may not be applied in the workplace. For an MBA management project, we are looking for that hybrid between rigour and relevance. We will develop a little bit later on the idea of the academic professional and the professional academic. What we are interested in the MBA is developing the academic professional. So these are examples of naughty, bad words: study, plan, recommendation, investigation, research. That's not to say we can't use them, it's just that we use them less. These, however, are lovely words that we love using with a management project: deployed, operationalised, implemented, impact. These are the three characteristics of an MBA project, therefore. Firstly, it needs to be actionable in the workplace. Secondly, it needs to be of real value to the participants' organisation, something that requires implementation. Thirdly, it needs to be multidisciplinary. This is not an MSc in finance, it's not an MSc in marketing, for example. The MBA is multidisciplinary in its approach and with its syllabus. So what does actionable in the workplace actually mean? First of all, it needs to be something within the sphere of your influence. It needs to be something you can work on and see the results within the time frame of the project. Thirdly, we question what outputs can you implement by the end of the project. So we've said that the management project needs to be of strategic value. We've also said it needs to be actionable in the workplace. However, they are two aspects which are mutually exclusive. So we have something of a balancing act here. So we have strategic value on our seesaw on the left and actionable in the workplace on the right of the seesaw. But actually, it's more of a calculus between strategic value and actionable in the workplace. So at point A, we have something which is of high strategic value, but is not actionable in the workplace, something that's perhaps very far off on the time horizon. At point B, we have something which is very actionable in the workplace, but is of little strategic value, so it may be just the day-to-day action of one's job. The sweet point is point C, which is the maximum point between A and B, which is of strategic value, also of actionable in the workplace. So how do we reach this point of inflection? When we mean actionable, we don't mean that everything has to be implemented by the end of it. The lowest form of actionable can be influence, so that may be, for example, a presentation at the board of directors where support is given to the management project. And it also depends on the time horizon. So your problem, issue, challenge or opportunity will be somewhere between the influence at the bottom left and something which will be implemented during the time horizon of your management project. You need to have a clear idea of where you actually lie on this particular trajectory. So there are various implications for this, and this is a diagram I refer to as a management project diamond because there needs to be three elements to it. First of all, there needs to be literature, which is literature from the relevant areas of management and business that are going to be relevant to your particular problem, issue, challenge or opportunity. So that literature will demonstrate good practice but will be decontextualized. The way it is contextualized is by data collection, data that is relevant how you're going to customize the good practice to your particular situation, which may agree or it may conflict with good practice. Either is an outcome. That data collection is typically, but not exclusively, by questionnaires or by interviews. And the third element of the management project diamond is the intervention. What are you going to do about it? We're not going to look at books, look at journals, collect some data and do nothing about it. As managers are responsible for implementation, and that's what we will be doing on the MBA management project. This diagram shows what's referred to as a Revin's matrix, where we have issues that are familiar or unfamiliar, and we have conditions that are also familiar and unfamiliar. It has been adapted from the original. The reason is this is shown as a 2x2 matrix, where in actual fact it is something that is more on a scale rather than a definite boundary between the two. So something to think about is whether you're looking at familiar conditions and familiar issues. Well, that's probably something that is actionable in the workplace but of low strategic value. Then we have issues which can be unfamiliar, which indicates a high strategic value, and conditions which may be familiar, which is usually the category that people fall into, which is the one that is of strategic value. So in framing your problem, issue, challenge or opportunity, it may be that issues are familiar but in unfamiliar conditions, and that is when, for example, in exceptional circumstances, you could be working in a different organisation. However, issues that are unfamiliar in conditions that are unfamiliar is usually within different organisations. So it's normally at the top right or exceptionally at the bottom left of this diagram that you will be interested in. And again, it's around framing your project, understanding what your project is about that helps with this particular diagram. So let's extend that a little bit more and think about what the outcomes that we're interested in. First of all, in terms of how actionable it is, and in terms of the problem, issue, challenge or opportunity. If it's of a strategic value and it wasn't implemented, obviously we want to try and avoid that. If it's something that was implemented but the implementation failed, well, you'll probably get the MBA, but it may be career limited. If the actionability is strategic and the problem succeeded, then that's fine, provided there were some actions. However, if it was actionable in the sense that it's been implemented and it succeeded, that is the sweet spot that we're aiming for on the MBA Management Project. I've already referred to this PICO principle, which is problem, issue, challenge or opportunity. In the UK, we tend to be a little bit pessimistic in our views and refer to problems. Issues is value neutral. Challenge is what the US tend to frame things as, or it may of course be the opposite of these, which is an opportunity. It might be a sales opportunity, for example, or marketing opportunity that you are looking at, which is why I prefer to refer to them as problem, issues, challenge and opportunity, because in that way we cover the whole spectrum of what you may be involved in. We're going to take something of a diversion now to consider what is known as the garbage can model. And this is something that was dreamt up by a guy called March and Cohen. And they say that organisations are a garbage can of problems, solutions, participants and choice opportunities. And there's the definition there for you to consider. So that was something that was thought of quite presciently in the 1970s. And let's fast forward now to Davin and Prusak, who wrote the book What's the Big Idea? And within the big idea, what they do is they trace management solutions. And these are often solutions looking for problems. And that's the important distinction here. The management project is about generating solutions, but they are solutions that address particular problems, issues, challenges, or opportunities. So that may, for example, involve cost-benefit analysis. It may involve the idea of globalization. It may involve the leadership element. So these are all concepts or solutions looking for problems. This is where the multidisciplinarity comes from. We're not doing an MBA in finance, we're not doing an MBA in marketing. Because it's problem-driven, problems do not respect the conventional boundaries that we put around subjects in management. The other aspect to consider is that we don't solve problems, although I have used that expression earlier in the presentation. There can be this idea of oversight, flight and resolution. Resolution is obviously when the problem is solved. And this again develops from the work of Cohen and March from 1974. But also there may be oversight when we don't need to do something and a problem, issue, challenge or opportunity effectively solves itself. Or there may be flight. It may attach itself to another problem. We also need to consider this idea of amelioration. that we don't solve the problem. The best that we can ever do is ameliorate, lessen the impact if it is a negative impact that's happening. Rittel and Weber from the planning literature came up with this idea of tame, wicked and intractable problems, and was subsequently taken up by management. So tame problems are relatively straightforward, wicked are difficult to solve, and intractable are obviously problems, issues or challenge or opportunities that are usually problems that are impossible to solve. So again, you need to think about whether you're dealing with a tame, wicked or intractable problem. And if you are, then it may be that if it's wicked or intractable, then the best that you can do is ameliorate it, not solve it. The diagram on the right shows the management of change basic diagram, where we are changing from a point A and we want to envisage the characteristics of the point B. So from what to what are we changing? And obviously what your responsibility is as a leader is changing your organisation from how you characterise it in part A to how you'd characterise it in part B. However, again, we have this idea that we don't solve problems, and there are often, to use a phrase, discontinuities between solution and implementation, also known as the implementation gap, that by the time we arrive at point B, we actually realise that point B was actually never achievable in the first place. That's fine, provided that there is some learning and there is some amelioration in the original problem, issue, challenge or opportunity. So we referred to this a little bit earlier, and that is the difference between the professional academic and the academic professional. What we are not doing on the MBA, we are not trying to generate a professional academic. We don't expect you to enter the halls of academia within the next few years, although that's to say, if you do fancy developing a career as a professional academic, that an MBA would exclude that, not in the slightest. What we are interested in, though, is developing what we refer to as the academic professional, somebody who is familiar with the literature, is familiar with the rigour of data collection, but also being able to generate knowledge and the responsibilities in generating knowledge. In practice, however, these are not mutually exclusive, and they are rather two different scales between professional academic and the academic professional. The emphasis now changes on the MBA. Previously, you will have been used to a pedagogic style that's syllabus-based. It's push technology, where the syllabus is effectively pushed on you. You have little choice as to what you're able to study. It now moves to so-called andragogic or student-centred learning, where the progress is dependent on you. It's problem-based and it uses pull technology. As described before, in a pull technology that is problem-based, these problems do not respect the conventional categories that we use for business and management studies. And the quote from the bottom there summarises it all, where the problem is both the syllabus and the lesson, hence the management project. So we see the distinction between manager and management development, a distinction that Peter Drucker made. In management development, it's about how we develop managers for the organisation, where manager development is about developing the manager more holistically. So previously, it's around an element of pedagogic, syllabus-based and pull technology, whereas andragogic is now the final stage because it's problem-based, it's pull technology, and it's about you as an independent researcher working on your own management problem. So, as we've said before, the management of change is around the leadership of improvement. We've seen this slide before in the management project diamond of slide 13. Meliorism is a belief that the world can be made into a better place by human effort. Meliorism is a fundamental principle of management. It is a manager's mandate to improve the health of an organisation, and that is what we're achieving with the management project. Praxis is the word that we use when we're referring to turning theory into practice. And as Igor Ansov said, it is no trick to formulate a strategy, the problem is to make it work. And that's what we're working on here. This cloud characterises your current position. You have an organisational challenge, but you don't know quite what it is. It's nebulous. It's something that you can't quite decide how it's going to pan out. So in order to think about the various different characteristics, we have the three at the bottom in green, which is, first of all, it's something that's strategically important. Secondly, it's actionable in the workplace. And there is a balance between those two. We need to think about how more strategically important or how more actionable in the workplace. Is it something that's too actionable in the workplace, or it's something that's so strategic that we're not going to see the benefit within the time of the management project? The third element is that it needs to be multidisciplinary. On the right-hand side, we see the elements that make most projects multidisciplinary. If they involve people, if it involves finance, and it involves information. Information is what we develop through our research methodology, and our intervention strategy is what we're going to do about it. These two have a dotted line between the two because they interact over the life cycle of the project. As your management project evolves, you'll get a greater understanding of what your management project is about. It is the convention that you write your management project up as if it was always going to be that way. You always write it up in hindsight. So if you imagine that this is a diagram we were looking at before with meliorism, with 2003 as being point A and 2005 as being point B, the bits in between are illustrated by this Ishikawa diagram and illustrate another point. When you're writing up, do you write up thematically or do you write it up in terms of the temporal issues? Do you write it up as a story? The answer is you write it up in hindsight and with themes. You don't try and write it up as a story. If you try and write it up as a story, then you'll trip yourself up as you change between themes and the temporal issues. And here is the example of my master's degree dissertation, and I only was able to write this as a diagram in retrospect. So we had Burl, which was the name of the company that I worked for in 1993, and it was a 2-year project because it was all by dissertation, and Burl in 1995. That shows the temporal aspects between point A and point B. The parts in between are the themes of strategy, marketing and organisational development, and the further sub-themes which are then subsequently used to do the write-up of the management project. Though do bear in mind that my dissertation was quite a bit larger than yours because it was all by dissertation. And that concludes this presentation on MBA project characteristics. Thank you for listening.